what seems inevitable now that inflation is well above the Reserve Bank's preferred range is that interest rates are going up. But by how much is the question that every business owner and household will be trying to work out. Richard Yetsenga is Chief Economist with the ANZ Bank and joins us now. Richard, look, I put to the Treasurer just a little while ago and he agreed this is not just one or two interest rate rises, is it? If money markets are right, it could be even a dozen, of 0.25% rate rises.
We should be expecting a lot of rate rises over the next year or so, I think, Ross. That's pretty clear. We can all debate the timing, although the case for the first hike in May seems pretty overwhelming despite the election. But interest rates, we've never started a cycle this far behind. We've never started a cycle with interest rates this low, certainly not when inflation is running at 2 or 3 decade highs. The Reserve Bank has quite a job and it's likely to need to move quite a way and quite quickly, in fact.
Okay, so does today's inflation number, 5.1% annually, does that actually now make you believe the Reserve Bank should, as an independent Reserve Bank, raise interest rates during the election campaign next week in May?
Look, Ross, I don't think about it as what they should do, of course, because that ties you in knots. I just try and forecast what the bank will do. Their framework has been to put wages at the front of the queue, but this which suggests that they should go in June, but this inflation number, I think, is just too strong. They've got plenty of reason beyond wages to start the hiking cycle now.
Okay, so does it really mean right now that, for every business that, the ANZ lends money to, every home and household that you lend money against, that you've got to tell them right now that, right, you've got to prepare, you've got to be ready for these rate rises, and you've probably got to anticipate that there are going to be, well, as I say, maybe a mortgage with a 4.5% or a 5% in it by the time this cycle is finished to try and, if you like, quell the inflation?
The problem with the policy strategy which has been adopted is that by keeping rates so low so far into the economic cycle, once the RBA started to move, it was always going to need to move very aggressively. And that's the situation, I think, in which the bank finds itself. So it's not just about the fact that rate rises are coming, but we probably haven't seen a cycle with this sort of aggressiveness from interest rates since 1994, I think. I'm trying to remember another period which is comparable. And so we're just going to have to see how the economy handles it. I think certainly this year the economy will handle it fine, but calibrating those rate moves is going to be more complicated given the bank is starting with inflation much higher than normal.
Well, as I put to the Treasurer also, it was Jerome Powell, the chair of the US Federal Reserve, who last week was very candid in saying if the central bank doesn't get the settings right, then it risks a recession in the United States, the biggest economy. Now, the flow-over effect of something like that would be very catastrophic for Australia as well, especially given our own central bank would be going through its own interest rate rising cycle.
I think the reality, Ross, is that what I say is the least risky part of the economic cycle is when the data has already based, which happened in about mid-2020, but policymakers are still very focused on the downside risks, still keeping policy very stimulatory and, in fact, still easing. And that's been the story of the last 18 months. So once the central bank starts to hike, the risks unquestionably rise. They always do. And some people are talking about recession. There is a recession, I'm sure, out there somewhere. But as with all these things, it's the timing matters. I don't see the preconditions for a recession today, but what I do see is a very complicated policy challenge for both the Reserve Bank of Australia and the Federal Reserve in the US.